So my name is Allison Jessing. I'm here on behalf of our CEO and President of Howard County Library System, Tonya Akins, to welcome you. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We are in for an unbelievably powerful conversation. If you were here for the film or you saw the film at home, I'm sure you were as moved by it as we all were. Before we begin tonight, a couple of just quick housekeeping items. Please silence your cell phones so we can have an uninterrupted event. And also quickly just take notes of the emergency exits on either side here and then at this back wall. Thank you for doing that. Before we start our program, I'd like to respectfully honor the Susquehannock Confederation who governed, lived, and farmed and hunted on the land we now call Howard County. Their nations conceded into land treaties in 1652 and 1661 after English colonizers ended their generational governance and stewardship of the land that Howard County is built on. This practice of land acknowledgement is to honor and respect the indigenous inhabitants both from the past and the present. This program was organized through the Howard County Library System's Racial Equity Alliance by members of the African American Community Roundtable, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Howard County, and the Howard County NAACP. And we'd also like to recognize the MLK Junior Holiday Commission and thank all of our partners for contributing and supporting this event. Specifically, I'd like to thank and acknowledge our community and library planning team, Laura Johnson, Jennifer Goldberg, Bonnie Sorak, Tracy Williams, Gordon Fuller, Lynn Gaines Kaplan, Betsy Singer, David Marker, Laura Salganic, Reverend Dr. Barbara Morton, Shauna Levy, David Hugo Barrett, Reverend Dr. Ricky Harvey Jr., Charles Koplik, Willie Flowers, Eric Lawn, and Robert Lockett. And that's a lot of names, and if those people could just stand up so we could take a moment to recognize them, we'd all appreciate it. Thank you all so much. And I also want to offer some special thanks to my colleague Katie DeSalvo-Thronson, who is an integral member of this planning team. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join us tonight, but she's here with us in spirit. And I just wanted to say when she sees this recording, we appreciate her efforts, and we thank her for all of her hard work on this program. We also want to thank the Horizon Foundation for their sponsorship of this event, which is the first in a series that will run through the spring. At Howard County Library System, we believe true and lasting change requires true and lasting intention to learn, grow, and act. Act is the operative word here, and it's the inspiration for this series. This series is called Films for Change, and it explores activism, action, and community solutions that dismantle racism and bring about positive change. Each screening we'll have in this series will be followed by a panel discussion similar to what we have here tonight, and more details are going to be coming to you soon about the rest of the installments in that ongoing series. So please be sure to stop at the back on your way out and make sure you grab some of the materials our partners have brought. We also have copies of the local equity report produced by Howard County Library System, which is a data-driven analysis of equity issues within Howard County. We have copies available in the back. So we have an amazing panel of guests tonight, and if I tried to read you all of their bios, we would be here till morning because they are some amazing folks. So instead, I'm asking you to scan that QR code or go to the link that you see on the screens. Scroll past the film information, and you'll be able to read all about our amazing panel. But I am going to introduce our moderator for this evening, Dr. John Wesley. John is the Public Information Officer for Baltimore Office of Equity and Civil Rights. He's a seasoned journalist with an extensive body of published work in print and electronic media. He received a fellowship in 1969 to Yale University in his significant field of study, political science and English literature. After graduation, he became a reporter and anchor for WLBT-TV 3 News in Jackson, Mississippi. And in 1972, he received a fellowship to Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism's Minority Journalism program. His writing in poetry and prose has been published in 9 anthologies worldwide and in Spanish, Arabic, and Farsi. He's been published in 149 of America's 200 Black newspapers, as well as the Washington Post Outlook section, the International Herald Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, the Baltimore Sun, Essence Magazine, and the Afro-American newspapers. He's been a guest on all of the major significant television and radio networks, including CNN, BET, Fox, NPR, and Radio 1, and his music is in rotation in 7 countries. We have a real Renaissance man with us tonight. Previously, Mr. Wesley was served as the Deputy Director of Communication for the Housing Authority of Baltimore City and Housing and Community Development. Previously, he'd served for 6 years as Housing Discrimination Investigator for the Howard County Office of Human Rights as well. He's going to moderate our fantastic panel tonight, so I'm going to turn it over to John. Thank you all. Welcome, John.
Thank you. I'm honored to be invited to be here. I have wanted to host a conversation like this a long time, but nobody asked me. But of course, I call it my civil rights boss here in Howard County. Willie Flowers called me, and when Willie called me, of course, I said yes. I'm really honored to be here with you too, because I am the byproduct of the relationship between African Americans and Jews in this country. I am the byproduct. What do I mean by that? Well, my godmother, Fannie Lou Hamer, and my grandmother worked for the same Jewish families. Mrs. Fannie Lou was the cook. My grandmother ran the house, took care of the kids, and I got a chance to be around Jewish families very early. I had friends who were close to me as a kid, just as I had black friends who were close. I had Jewish friends who were close. And I was telling Charles Koplick that my buddy Bob Livingston and I, we had this deal, you know. If I wanted a brown cowboy suit, I would tell Bob, and he would tell his mother that he wanted a brown cowboy suit, and then he would give me the brown one and ask her for a green one. But anyway, so it's just good, and this evening will be just an extension of that, and we will exchange. How many of you saw the film today? Okay, that is very good. That was so cathartic for me to see the film. When you see you saw Kiwi Kaplan. Kiwi Kaplan was on my board of directors when I was in college. Got a chance to spend time with Mr. Kaplan, and in fact, he gave me my first summer job in 1967. I went to Boston and worked at a hospital called the Jewish Memorial Hospital in Roxbury. I was a geriatrics assistant, so my job, and I had the graveyard shift, so I got a chance to spend a lot of time with Jewish families and to help care for their family members and learn about their culture. One of the guys, as a matter of fact, was on the list of people who could get marijuana from the U.S. government. So I won't say what friendship we had, but I would just say that there were only about 8 to 12 people on the list at the time. So, but anyway, I could go on with that. But anyway, it's great to be here, and we are going to get right into it. I want to start by, I'm sure you saw the name of all of the panelists, and you know who they are? I'm sure you do. Do I need to call their names again, or what do you think? Maybe they can introduce themselves. Okay, they introduce themselves. Okay, so before I do the first question, would you introduce yourself coming this way? Yes.
Hi, my name is Sydney Barnes. I'm 17. I go to Appleton High School.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kaya Dancy. I'm 22 years old, and I'm a graduating senior at Spelman College.
I'm Becca Nyberg. I have been an immigration attorney for my career and have been involved in a number of organizations like the NAACP, and I'm with you. Willie calls me. I do what he says.
Good evening. My name is Reverend Morton, and I'm the chair of the Faith and Religion Committee for the NAACP here in Howard County. I'm a preacher most of the time. My background is social justice.
I'm Craig Axler, and I'm privileged to be the rabbi of Temple Isaiah in Fulton, and proud to live in Howard County.
Hello, I'm Ricky Harvey Jr. I serve as assistant pastor of St. John Baptist Church here in Columbia, Maryland.
Thank you, thank you. All right, we're going to go right to the first question. What was your reaction to the film, and how does the story of the history inform us today? Who'd like to start?
So I have the privilege of being a ECYP fellow, which, if you don't know what that is, that's the Elijah Cummings Youth Program. We do a lot of work. It's a lot of the program is bringing the Black and Jewish communities together. I had the privilege of going to Israel this summer and learning a lot about Jewish culture from the source. And watching the film was not necessarily all the new information, but information that I liked having reiterated to me. It was a good reminder of the important things and a reminder of what we need to focus on. And I think it gave me, I've been told I'm a little bit militant, so it gave me it helped me cool me down a little bit. I'll say nothing wrong with the militant exercises you did. But similar to Sydney, I'm an ECYP alum, so not all of the information was new information. But it was great to see again, refreshing to become aware and to remember our great histories and how intertwined they are. In seeing the film, I'm also reminded that our histories aren't merely connected through suffering, but connected through resistance. I believe there's a story in the Talmud about planting fruit trees that won't bear fruit for 70 years. But why would you plant a fruit tree that you won't even see the fruit come from? They say, because I'm planting it for the generations to come. I believe our cultures share this tradition of doing things not for ourselves, but for those who will come after us, for our children and our children's children, to see a world better than the world that we currently live in. So to see those relationships, although they deviate at times, continue to come back together and recognize why our communities find each other time and time again.
So I had a much different experience because I didn't know a lot of what was in that film. I grew up right outside of Greensboro, North Carolina. I went to a very rural high school. I got the highlights, I guess you would say, of the civil rights movement, but we never really delved into any of it. And, not even in college, not even in law school did I hear any of that. So a lot of this information, even about my own community, the Jewish community, was brand new to me. And it was really inspiring to me to see how we have been intertwined and how selfless people were, because I think a lot of what we see in the news today are very selfish stories about people being selfish. So to hear how not too long ago, within many people's lifetimes, we had people selfishly showing up because it was the right thing to do, not because there was something in it for them, not because they would benefit necessarily, but because it was the right thing to do, I found very inspiring, and I found that film very interesting because of that, and I did learn a great deal because of it.
Again, there was nothing new in the film to me. I grew up in Washington, D.C., one of the suburbs, in an all-Jewish community. So I had interacted with Jewish people during my growing up, I guess, through the 6th grade. But what the film reminded me of was the abscess that Dr. Martin Luther King talks about. That abscess, it reminded me that there's still some pus, pardon me for being gross, but there's still that pus of hatred that's glooming beneath the surface. And for me, it reminds me that I have to get to work because America needs a root canal.
Well, root canal aside, I had two reactions, and the easier one, and this was the second time that I saw the film because Temple Isaiah screened it and did internal conversation last year on the film and online discussion. The easy reaction was a reaction of pride, and it's history that I was raised with. as a product of the Reform Jewish movement and so many of the leaders who were there, and Kivi Kaplan and all of these folks, and the folks who were being interviewed there, for the most part are part of my movement that I feel a byproduct of, and I was raised with these stories. Today is actually a day after the yard site, the death anniversary of Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was really one of the central figures and probably the most prominent name and face. And in the Jewish tradition, we honor people typically on their death anniversary, not on their birthday. This concept of, your death anniversary represents that you've completed your work, and so we're lifting up and holding the work that Abraham Joshua Heschel did alongside Dr. King. And as a transition kind of from the pride, the intense pride that I have in kind of everything that was lifted up from the Jewish community and the partnership and that shared legacy, really, is actually something else from Rabbi Heschel, who has a brilliant phrase when he encountered really substantial resistance within the Jewish community to people who said, why are you going down there? Why are you doing this? Why are you making waves? Why are you out there marching with these folks? Why are you out there kind of putting our community at the front of this and maybe drawing attention to us? His answer was, I was praying with my feet. They say, why aren't you as a rabbi in the study hall or leading worship? And he would reply, I was praying with my feet. And that's always spoken to me. But that's the transition to the other piece of my reaction to the film, and it's a reaction of, I guess, frustration and sadness. Because the film, as brilliant and wonderful and beautiful as it is such an incomplete story. Because it holds up one piece of the relationship between the African American Jewish communities. And I'm a product of the late 1970s, early 80s, through the 80s into the early 90s. And those were years when I was deeply involved in that relationship, but when that relationship was pretty tough and had been through some real battering. And I feel like kind of it's a place where we are in some sectors today, and yet we have this basis of relationship and these common causes that really ought to be, what we're giving our energy to. And that's why I'm glad that there's this conversation tonight to take the movie and then kind of move forward from it and to really look what can we do here with that and with that relationship. So.
I'll close with a reaction to the film that's one of having been inspired and encouraged. You mentioned Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King, and one of the things that Rabbi Heschel's daughter mentioned in the film was related to her memory of her father and Dr. King and even other religious leaders praying in the same space. And what it brings to mind for me is our call as a community to learn how to share space despite our differences, right? I'm so inspired to consider what it really means to share space in healthy, wholesome ways, right? Where we can respect one another's differences, where we can appreciate that we are not the same and that is not a threat to one another, and where we can honor our shared legacies and shared realities. And so those kinds of connections, despite the racial differences, despite the differences from backgrounds, that when we learn how to share space, we may pray in different dialects, we may see God as an existent being or an inexistent being. We may have different histories and different ideologies, but the ability to share space together is one that I totally glean from this film. And also in sharing space, what does it look like to really care? I'm inspired by the action and the work of those who we witnessed in this film tonight, who expressed care. And I think I appreciate our presence tonight. I think that's an expression of care. And I think we can all be inspired to care more in our efforts, similar to the rabbi who says, my feet are my prayer, right? That my presence alone does not comprehensively express care, that my words don't, but my works do. And so I think the film presses us to ask ourselves the question, not just how you feel, not just what you think, but what will you do?
Wow. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. That's powerful. One of the things that said, you wanted to follow up?
If I could.
Go right ahead, sure.
One thing that the film inspired in me, you reminded me of it, is there was a lot of talk in the film about how they were able to come together because of this common thing that they had, about common struggles and common triumphs. I think that for me personally, I find that there's a little bit of a line of thought where you can only connect or love something truly if you are the same. And I think that we need to move away from that thought because there are experiences that are uniquely Jewish that I, as a non-Jewish Black person, will never understand. And there are experiences that are uniquely Black that non-Black Jewish people will not understand. But that doesn't mean that we can't love each other and not just despite our differences, but to celebrate our differences, and that our differences can be a beautiful thing. And I think that moving away from this thought that we can only love each other because we have this same cause is we can support each other, we can support each other in our different causes. And we can support each other in ways that, like, we can support the Jewish community and their struggles even if they are different from ours, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Okay. And I thank you for that. Let me just say also, when, in looking at the film, I was reminded of, did any of you see the exhibit at the Reginald Lewis Museum from swastika to Jim Crow? Okay, somebody did. Okay. That was an exhibition at the Reginald Lewis Museum. It's called From Swastika to Jim Crow. And what it was about was the repatriated German Jews who came to this country after they were expelled by Hitler from Germany. And many of them came to America, and where did they work? They worked at HBCUs, like the one that I attended. As a matter of fact, and I was a dead ringer for this, to moderate this. Listen, the way I got to college, the way I got to college was that I had signed up to go to Job Corps. Okay, I was going to become a carpenter. Okay, in Milwaukee, I knew exactly where I was going. And a Jewish professor, Dr. Ernst Bobo Berinsky, who was really the kind of moderator of that whole film, From Swastika to Jim Crow. Dr. Berinsky says to me one day, well, so young man, where are you going to college? I said, Dr. Berinsky, I'm going to the Job Corps in Milwaukee. He said, young man, you're going to college. I said, no, Dr. Berinsky, my family doesn't have any money. He said, you come and see me. I went up to see him at Tougaloo, and he had arranged for me to audition with the college choir, Dr. Lovelace. And my music director in high school didn't want me to go to Tougaloo, so he wouldn't rehearse me to go. So I took one of Johnny Mathis's albums, and I learned all the songs, and I just learned how to sing them a cappella. And Dr. Berinsky arranged for me to go to Tougaloo, and I sung 4 of Johnny Mathis's songs a cappella. And at the end of my performance, the head of the music department said, can I see you in the back? And because of Dr. Berinsky, I got a 4-year scholarship, full scholarship to college as a music. And he allowed me to major in political science and English literature. And I became an author. But anyway, that connection, that kind of caring, my point to you is that there are historical connections in our relationships that we should be building on, because there are people who benefited from those. So I'll start from there and I'll go to my next question here. Can you move from friction to relationship and shared action? How do we do that?
I think somebody mentioned the word love and care. First of all, we have to really learn how to love the ones we call our enemies. And we have to begin to care for each other. There is no reason, this morning I was just meditating, and it came to me that no one should have to diminish in order for anyone else to be elevated. We can all move together. So I think it's very important that we begin to care for and about each other. We're all different. God forbid if we were all the same, there would be no fun. But we're all different, so let's take those differences and put them to work. Let's utilize those differences to make a difference. And I think we'd be a better world, a better place. It would be a better space. And like Dr. Harvey said, there is no reason why we can't come together in the same space.
Right. Right.
I will pray as a Baptist preacher or a Methodist preacher.
Right.
Rabbi will pray as a Jewish rabbi. But yet we're praying for peace. We're praying for the same things, for community. I'm reminded of reading Dr. King's book, A Knock at Midnight. And in there, he's talking to Paul, one of his sermons, and he says, Paul says, you know, man, what's going on? And I'm paraphrasing.
Right, sure. That's okay.
Is that from the Greek?
That's from the Hebrew.
Thank you.
What's going on down there? And Dr. King, he goes through this thing, and he says, you know, they've got these planes, Paul, that will take you from New York to D.C., and you can be in Paris for lunch. You can be all these places. You can do all these things. Medicine. Look at the advances in medicine. Look at the highways in the sky. He says, but the one thing they have not done, they have not become a brotherhood.
Become what?
A brotherhood,
A brotherhood, exactly.
okay, or a sisterhood, or a community.
Right.
And in that community is where we have that shared space, and we live together.
Well, and I agree with that, and I just want to say, too, that one of the things that we can do is that we can share biblical history with each
Sure.
other, okay? And I hope you'll talk more about that as we go through the evening. I think it would be a good thing if we shared more of our religious commonalities together. I think that would help. Go on. No, go.
For me, growing up, my very black mom would demonstrate to me one of the greatest showings of love is respectful correction. And like she loves to correct me.
That's a good thing.
She does it because she loves me, and I think that there's fear that the bond between the Jewish community and the Black community is tenuous and doesn't, and we have to understand that we have this relationship that goes back decades, and it's not a fragile thing, and it's a good thing to be corrected and to respectfully know the best way to love your neighbor. I can't truly love you if I don't understand something. So if you are willing to tell me what it is that I need to know in order to assist you in your journey, and if I am comfortable enough to tell you the best way to assist me in mine, I think that's one of the best ways for us to come together.
There's a slight variation on the tie between what you both said. Dr. Morton kind of started with love, and it's a Hasidic story, and I think it really speaks to this question. Two old friends, they've known each other for years, are sitting at the tavern, and they're a few drinks in, and one looks at the other and says, "Do you love me?" And the other says, "So what are you talking about? We've been together for years. We've gone through all of these things together." He says, No. Do you love me? Do I love you? Of course I love you. He says, do you know what causes me pain? Silence. He says, how can you say you love me if you don't know what causes me pain? And I think that that's a really core principle here, you know, and that's a piece of the difficult work, but that's actually what gives the strong underpinnings to relationships that can endure is understanding what causes each other pain. And I think that when we've worked together as communities, when we've shared, I think there are times when we understand that with each other. But I think it's a question that we could all ask ourselves. Do we understand what causes the person who's less like us in this room pain? And are we understood? Is our pain understood? And I think that's a key component, because understanding that leads to a love that's greater than just, hey, I love you. So, yeah.
So in thinking about this question, I was reminded of a meme that went around a couple of years ago, and it said something along the lines of, human rights are not pie, right? Me taking a piece of pie does not mean that there is less pie for you to take. So in all of our respective faiths, we're sitting there and thinking about peace, but we're a lot of the times looking at peace just for ourselves or for our group. And I think we have to broaden our horizons and think that, when one of us is not free, we are all enslaved. We have to be able to broaden that out. And we also have to get away as a culture of the look at me kind of thing, right? So we have mitzvahs, which are good deeds in Judaism. And the highest level of mitzvah is doing something good for somebody when they will never know it is you. And we have gotten away from that as a culture, as a community. And I think if we kind of took a step back and said, I'm going to internalize what I'm hearing at my church, what I'm hearing at my synagogue, to do good by people. And I'm not going to do it because I benefit from it. I'm going to, hold the door open even though nobody's going to thank me for it. Nobody's going to remember I did it. But because the person walking in needs help and can't hold the door for themselves. And until we, take a good look at ourselves and see how we can act based on the things that we are professing in all of our houses of worship, regardless of the affiliation, I don't think that we'll get there. I want to be at the table with you. I will be at the table with you. But I don't think we'll have a big enough table unless we start doing that self-reflection first.
And in the vein of self-reflection, I think that one thing we also have to look at is, am I making sure that my behavior outside as an individual makes me a safe enough place to be corrected, or makes me a safe enough place to come to? And there are differences in our struggle where we can help the other. And so there's making sure that you as a person are open enough and safe enough and are as outspoken with your support, so that they know that you are a person that they can come to.
And I would, go ahead. Okay. I would add to answer the question about our ability to have shared action. I think shared action requires a level of shared education. Bishop Glenn Plummer was one of the featured speakers in the film. I was blessed to be with him in Jerusalem in July of 2022. Over dinner at his house, he shared with me more detail about Dr. King's time in Jerusalem in 1959, when Dr. King was 30 years old. And having left Jerusalem, we well know that Dr. King's last speech in Memphis, Tennessee, that I've been to the mountaintop, I'll have you know that's not some metaphorical hope of Dr. King. He was referencing his time when he says, I've seen the promised land.
Right.
He's referring to his literal time in Jerusalem. Dr. King went so far as to, from his time in Jerusalem in 1959, he went so far as to plan a trip for thousands of African Americans to eventually make a trip to the Holy Land, as we call it, and that trip never happened as a result of being postponed because of the Six-Day War. But Dr. King's ambition was not just to try to kindle people's emotional connection to work. He didn't just want to kindle the heart. his goal in pursuing exposing people to the experience of the Jewish people in Israel was also to educate the mind. Are we humble enough to learn about other people's experiences so that we can be in community? It's one thing for us to sit in this same space. Are we humble enough to take the time to learn about other people's challenges, other people's burdens? I know you have your litany of challenges that you and your community exist in, but will you listen long enough? Because maybe you can see the similar threads, the similar challenges, the similar inspiration that we possibly share. And I appreciate Dr. King's example of educating ourselves enough to serve one another. Full hearts are not enough if you have an empty mind.
That's right. Let me just ask too at this point, are there things in the news today that bring us closer together? Are the headlines today sending us further apart?
I wanted to add in on the last point and also on this point of headlines. I think that we have so much in common with each other, so much more in common with each other than we will ever have different. But I also think it's important to recognize what we have different with each other. Our differences are different for a reason. And not even to acknowledge what our differences are, but to stand firm in our differences, to disagree loudly and firmly. I think the headlines make it seem that this is my position and this is your position, and we can never find an equal ground. We can never be friends. We can never find a common place. But what if in listening to you and being a student of your struggles, of your successes, of hearing how you do things differently, of how you view the world differently, of how you fervently agree with my perspectives, we can still come together at the end of the day in a place of love, a place of understanding, and push the needle forward. To me, that's the point that the news misses, that sometimes we miss in our goals to love one another as wholly as we can. It won't always be a rainbow story fairy tale. It often will be points of conflict. We are different people. Even amongst each other, we are different people. How can we engage our differences and our disagreements to utilize them to still the progression of our communities at large?
And I think that, answering your headlines today question, I think that in speaking to, differences in time periods as well as differences in culture, I think that there are, in my opinion, I think that headlines today don't necessarily bring us apart any more than headlines in the past did. I think that there's more spotlight on headlines that bring us apart, and I think that that's something that everybody loves to hate watch and to hate read and this is so terrible. Let me send it to 3 people so that they can also see how terrible this is. But I think that something we can all work on is, even though there are, yes, headlines tearing us apart and stories tearing us apart, there are stories bringing us together, and we can work to spotlight those stories, because I don't think that there are any more or any less of either. I think that we are focusing our attention on one, and we should spread our horizons.
I guess I won't tell you what the acronyms mean for CNN and MSNBC and some of the other stations. But, I think Dr. Harvey made it very clear that education is important. I can listen to CNN and MSNBC and Fox and all that other stuff all day long, but I know the truth for myself, which means I've gone out and I've done some research. I've talked to some folks who know. I've talked to some older folks, for example, who came up in the South during the Civil Rights Movement and even before, and heard stories from my grandmother and from my aunts, which give me a different perspective and shed a different light on what's going on today. Today, we just hate each other. We just don't like each other. And there are 2 things that's driving us apart: power and money. And just I think it was yesterday, I read a story about a Jewish woman. Her last name was Epstein. She works as a consultant, and I forgot what type of consultant. But she said that this was the first time that she'd ever experienced anti-Semitism in her employment. She said she'd gone along for 30, 40 years, and nobody had ever said anything out of the way to her. But all of a sudden, after all this news, started coming out, people saying certain things, she was treated a different way. And they were told her, and then someone told her that she would never be a part of their group again. So I think we have to be careful of what we listen to and what we live by. And I think we need to focus on the truth and stop listening to the lies.
Now, let me just ask, we have 3 members of the clergy.
You gonna hold that against me?
Okay. In the African American lexicon in our community, one word you hear a great deal of, one name, Jesus. Does the use of that name contribute to the distance between us as a people? Because of the different relationships, or the assumed relationships, or the assumed meaning of Jesus to a Jew being different from what it means to a black, the difference in the Torah and the Bible, et cetera, et cetera. Does the use of that term or a belief that we have different relationships with that name contribute to our distance?
So I'll say this. A dear friend, a very wise imam from my community where I lived in Philadelphia, expressed it to me this way. He said, Craig, God is God. People make religions. And I was shocked. I mean, I'm in the mosque with him, and he's telling me, people make religions. All of this is all people. God is God. There is no other God than God, and God is God. And so I don't really experience, I think, what you're speaking to. But I will say that from a Jewish perspective, that there is an element of the Christian story that is about the history of anti-Semitism and persecution. And that is not an ancient history, but that it continues into the current day. A few years ago at the Courageous Conversations, small groups that were in Howard County, I was in a small group, and I sat with the group, and I was the only Jew in the group, and I expressed to the group, I own, and I really know that I experience white privilege. We can have a long conversation about whether or not Jews are white people. And Jews, by the way, writ large, are not white people because 10 to 20% of Jews are Jews of color. In America, much larger percentage in Israel. But I know that when I was driving 2 weeks ago through the Deep South, that I experienced something different than somebody whose skin tone is different. Right? I recognize and I grapple with really the impact and what it means for me to have grown up as a suburban kid who was white and who has moved through the world without many of the challenges that other folks have. At the same time, in America, I don't think that many Christians recognize that there is actually something that I experience, which is the impact of Christian privilege. We live in, and I'm going to talk at the National Day of Prayer Breakfast next week with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and primarily African-American denomination and local. I will be one of just a couple of Jews in a room of Christians, and having experienced this, and I think most Jewish folks have had moments that they might not have termed moments where Christian privilege was really difficult and painful. But I have these conversations with young children, and I have these conversations with adults, and I've experienced it in my life. So I have absolutely no. hearing the name Jesus does not in any way distress me at all. Hearing people marching with tiki torches and chanting, "Jews will not replace us,"
Right.
as white Christian nationalists, which, by the way, Jews will not replace us, that's not about me, by the way. That's about y'all, right? That's about us all, right? That distresses me, the idea of a white Christian nationalism, or of the ways in which Christianity is used as a club in some ways in America. So, yeah.
Okay.
I know I'm not clergy, but I've absolutely been extremely uncomfortable because of the religious divide. So when Reverend Morton says the word Jesus, it comes from a place of love. I have no problem whatsoever, when we've prayed together, and that's totally fine. She actually seems to know my thoughts and my feelings better than anybody else, because the prayers that she gives to open the NAACP meetings seem like they come directly from my life most times. I have, however, experienced what I would call weaponized Christianity, where the word Jesus is being thrown out, and not necessarily at me in particular, but thrown out as the epitome of something that I will never be. In those spaces, that word is a weapon. And it doesn't have to even necessarily be the word Jesus. Like I said, I went to a rural high school. The Catholics were the weird ones, let alone this poor little Jewish kid.
Right.
Even though the Supreme Court had already outlawed this, the football team said the Lord's Prayer before they went on the field. If you did not participate in that Lord's Prayer, even if that wasn't your religion, you were very much othered and very much outside of the societal norm in high school. And that is a very, very uncomfortable place to be, not only as a teenager, but at any age. So I wouldn't say it's the word itself, but people do absolutely use Christianity in particular as a weaponized form. And, there are definitely spaces, even where it isn't so clearly used, weaponized, that it's very, very uncomfortable.
We're going to break up into sessions now, groups 5 or 6, and we would like, everybody's going to get Post-it notes, right?
Yeah, I'm going to put the questions up on the screen, and if you could break into groups of 4 to 6 people, preferably people you don't know, and you can discuss those questions in your small groups, and then we'll call everybody back to continue with closing remarks and thoughts.
Okay.
So make some new friends. And the Post-it notes you received on your handout when you walked in, we'd love it if you could write your takeaways from tonight. What is the most important impression, the most important thing you've learned or thought or experienced tonight? And I have at the back wall those flip charts. You can just leave those Post-it notes on those. We're going to use those to develop next steps with all of this process. So you'll see the flip charts in the back. And I'm going to go ahead and put those questions on the screen. Our panelists and our moderator will be out to join you in those conversations. It's just
We'd like to get some feedback from your sessions, and we're going to find out, do you want the panelists to talk first? Okay, yeah. Could you share some of what happened in your smaller sessions? There's something that stuck out.
Well, I'll go first. I had a great time in my session. To the back, yeah. But we talked about a lot of great things. I think we talked a lot about weaponized Christianity again, and how we can distinguish what it means to be of faith and then to utilize faith for evil. What I also think came out there at the end was the idea that we're in a unique county, in a unique place. Thinking about Columbia as an experiment when it first started, and Howard County larger. I was talking to my group about being an ECYP alum and that being based in Park Heights, and we talked about other communities which are sort of divided in this idea that there are Jewish communities on one side and Black communities on another side. I think here we have a unique space where it's more intermixed and we have more opportunities to tonight, where we can all come together and talk. So this idea that we're united in a space for change, and we can utilize this closeness, both physically and in our shared community efforts, to push that needle further, instead of being comfortable with the stagnation we might have reached, but to continue to advocate for that further progression.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, so my group kind of, I guess, have something that would dovetail with that. And that is, we noted the demographics of the room. And, you know, we said, we get it, it's a school night, it may be hard for families to come to these things, but our room is on the more experienced side, we'll put it that way. Right?
Wow.
And we talked about how important it was to get young people involved, and how could we do that? What are those steps? And we talked about invitations being issued. There's a story about a son who was invited to try robotics, and he resisted, and then did it and loved it, and now teaches robotics or helps with the robotics program now that he's gone through school and has come back. And I shared my experience where my kids weren't invited, they just had to go. For many years, I was a single mother, and when I was at NAACP executive meetings, my kids were there because there was no other parent at home for me to leave them with. We went to the meetings. And did they pay attention? Maybe, maybe not. But they did see, this is what we do. We go into rooms where we're the minority, right, which is fairly uncommon. We go in and we discuss things, and we engage in our community. And I think that's something, regardless of our age, that we can do, is model that behavior, and maybe sometimes not give the kids a choice.
Okay.
I'm going to do a screech and ask that gentleman in the black shirt with the yellow writing to speak from our group.
Oh, sure. So, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
I just wanted to first mention
Stand up.
that courageous. Sorry?
Stand up.
Oh, sure. My name is Randy Wilding, and I'm helping out with Courageous Conversations this year. Some of you have participated, or maybe you would like to. My organization is running the tech for it, so I'm not religiously affiliated, but we think that it is very important for the community to participate. It will be a hybrid event, so it will be both online, and it will be happening in 4 different houses of faith around Howard County. From our group, I would say that we had a realization specifically about the communities looking around Howard County, driving around and seeing them being racially divided. That the initial goal, at least for Columbia, for Rouse, was for it to be very integrated, have the interfaith community centers, and have people really living in community in their respective villages. And the other piece that we discussed was the poverty and the kids being the homelessness that is in Howard County, and what we can do to help that.
Thank you, thank you. Let me just pause too and recognize the youngest person in the room. Okay. What is his name, sir? Speak up. Hey. Wait. Blake Jones. Blake Jones. Welcome, Blake. Thank you. I got my first lessons when I was your age about this too. So welcome. So good. And tell your friends where you were last night. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Good to go.
The only thing I'll report out from my group is, we were blessed in the group to have some folks who've been in Columbia and chose to come to Columbia basically in the first few years. Other folks, all of us chose to come here for all kinds of good and ideological reasons. I am of the opinion, and I'm going to stick to this one, that as much of Rouse's vision has faded, there is still a very special thing that's happening in our region, and not just in Columbia, but I would say the spillover effect into Howard County. And much as I think that the Shared Legacies film points out that there is this incredible history and basis of cooperation and care for one another and common cause, that both the history of what Columbia's vision was and still exists, the elements that still exist, provide really some incredible material out of which we could build the next, years, decades, relationships. And I think that goes for our broader community, and I think that very much also speaks to the relationship between the Jewish and African American community and the ways in which we build on those structures. Because as much as I acknowledge that I kind of came through a lot of years of tension, I fervently believe that there is that common cause and relationship that is still there, and that can be the structure that we build on.
Our group culminated with Mr. Hash, who was sharing about the veil of prosperity here in Howard County that so easily hides the inequities related to health care and education and wealth and those, and even he mentioned the judicial system. And so I think that is such a necessary part of our conversation in this particular community, with such raving reviews about rated the safest place to live, where these people make all this money and they have so many trees and the grass is so green and the water is so clear. I think it's important for us to name the inequities that are beneath that veil of prosperity, and that was discussed in our group.
So read the report.
I'm reminded of something that, and I'm one of those Colombians who've been here long enough to have spent time with Mr. Rouse and walked around, Wild Lake with him and talked about art in the next America. And, he was known for saying that things that ought to be can be. Things that ought to be can be. I always found that such a fascinating statement, because if we look at the prosperity here, and I go back, I arrived in Columbia in 1973. I tell people that I thought I was moving up north, only to get to Maryland and find out I had moved up south. But at the same time, I looked for, in this community when I came here, what I had grown up with in Mississippi, in terms of mentors, in terms of my relationship with elders, So, looking for a church. Of course, the church that I first joined in Howard County was First Baptist Church of Guilford. Okay. I joined First Baptist Church of Guilford in 1974. Okay, and because that's where Dora McCarter was. Right. That's where Leola Dorsey was. Right. That's where Silas Craft was. I can just go on down the line, because these were the people who I knew would continue the kind of development and personal development and growth that I'd had when I was down south, okay? And I found it here. Now, I also began to work with people within the Jewish community out here that I met, and it's funny, I don't know why I was so surprised that I would find Jewish people in Maryland when I came here. It's not like, I was looking for Russians or something, but the idea that I could find those kinds of relationships here that would help take me across the chasm where I had grown up in the South, where my initial relationships were relationships of differences and fighting and trying to find ways of surviving, only to come here and find out that once I came into this area, I had to develop a new relationship with people who are not of my color, Jewish, whites, entirely, and to develop new kinds of relationships. Because the baggage that I had down there, I couldn't bring that baggage here. I had to leave that stuff down there and find out new ways of living and growing here. So, as we look at what we are doing tonight, if we go back to our friends, our workplaces, our places of worship, and we share the fact that, I was in a meaningful dialogue last night on relationship between African Americans and the Jewish community. And number two, I will approach my relationship with them differently in the future as a result of it. It's something for us to think about. Let me just give the panelists an opportunity, if you want to make other comments about the whole experience. Is there something you'd like to leave with the audience?
I think the thing that I would like to leave all of you with is a plea. I have the unique experience of the most consistent and overbearing, the most consistent and overbearing anti-Blackness that I've experienced to come from a Jewish person. And something that they used to say to me was, or to the people that he was, spreading his vitriol to was, well, I get it, I'm Jewish, or I just because I am, I can't be racist, I'm a Jewish person. And I say that not to place blame on any group of people. Jewish people are not a monolith. But I say that to say you've never looked at yourself enough. You've never reflected enough. And I beg you to not, because it's not enough to just say that we have this struggle in common. That's not enough to connect us. If we're connected on our common struggle, there are still going to be spots where we don't look at each other in the way that we're supposed to, where we don't treat each other the way that we're supposed to. It's not enough to just say that we have something in common and that's why we care for each other. We have to care for each other because we care for each other, and we have to do that in the correct way. And so I'm asking everyone to look at themselves and find their blind spots and ask and try and find places where you can make yourself better for other people, and maybe that will encourage other people to be better for you. And I think that because we really can't overcome anything before we acknowledge it, and we can't acknowledge it in anyone else before we acknowledge it in ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, that hit the nail on the head. I think,
We knew Mo.
Come on.
I think just to add, I would say to continue the conversation.
May I have your attention, please? I know the branch will be closing in 28 minutes. That's
okay, go ahead.
Good job, man.
I'll just let the announcement finish.
Okay.
You call right. But continue the conversation. It's so important, I think, in the film and here to recognize that silence can be violence, and not acknowledging that we need to sit down, we need to understand each other, we need to have difficult dialogues, we need to have courageous conversations, we need to engage one another as if we are neighbors who are trying to love each other. That starts with a conversation, and it can be as simple as a phone call to someone that you haven't called in a few weeks, or going out of your way to speak to a stranger in line. But we can't move past that hurdle unless we are courageous enough to start.
Okay. Anyone else in the panel before we run out of time?
I think brave conversations, brave and courageous conversations are great, and we should continue to have them. But I think we need some brave and courageous actions. We need to step beyond the praying, the kneeling, and we need to put our feet to work.
Okay.
That's what I was going to say. I was actually going to repeat your words that you told me before we started, which were, and forgive me if I butcher it, when you're making history, you don't know you're making history.
Exactly.
So take the action because it's right, not because you're going to get kudos or thanks, or take the action because it's right. And it doesn't have to be a big action. It can be a small action. It can be, going to a community meeting and standing up for a group of people that isn't normally represented there. It can be going to, I don't know, a march or, something more public and showing support. Whatever, we all have our different comfort zones and we all have our different capabilities, but take the action. Don't wait for somebody else to do it for you.
I will also add to the conversation the enlightenment of acknowledgement and how great it is. Yet acknowledgement alone will not change the future from the past. So our minds and our words and these very nice panel discussions and film viewings that if we're not careful, we can pat ourselves on the back tonight and say we've done a good job. But what we're doing tonight is no more impactful than a classroom education for a medical doctor. Until you give a prescription, until you apply the medicine, the work is not done.
With that, I will just say thank you so much for inviting me and allowing me an opportunity to be here with you and to facilitate this conversation. And I will be taking my direction from my boss over here, Mr. Willie Flowers, and thank you, and I'll see you again. Thank you so much.
Good evening again. My name is Willie Flowers, and I'm with the NAACP. And if you don't have a membership, get one, NAACP.org. I wanted to acknowledge the panelists and give them something fresh off the press. This is something to celebrate our new governor and administration. So you'll see the image of our next governor, Westmore, and the great Black-Eyed Susan that represents his family. So I want to share that with the, that's for you. Oh, you can give it away if you want to. And so if anybody wants one of those, let me know. And we also have, the NAACP's theme at our convention this year was This is Power. I didn't quite agree with that theme since we were in the middle of an election in Maryland, but so we changed it a little on the street in Howard County and said, Get Power, and we got it. And let me acknowledge that the power that we got, so leaving here, our goal is to really figure out how we can work together moving forward. So if there's any symbol of how we can move forward, is the fact that you have an African-American governor, an Indian person of Indian descent who's the lieutenant governor, and we have a African-American treasurer, an African-American attorney general, and a Jewish comptroller. So they've opened it up. So we have to work together from here, and I'm all in for it. Thank you.
Thank you to you all for coming tonight. Thank you so much to our esteemed panel and our amazing moderator. I really appreciated your time preparing for this evening and providing us with your insights. I cannot thank you enough.